Hello friends, I'm Alexander Swords. Welcome to my home office here in Melbourne, Australia, giving this presentation under very different circumstances to what I had intended. The session is the Forest Paths method for accessible narrative design. I'll just clarify straight off the bat. The accessible part of that is about the fact that it uses plain language, it uses simple definitions, and the method is designed to be accessed by the entire team. So to clarify your own ideas and help you collaborate with the rest of your team. This is me. I'm not going to go through everything. I've got qualifications. I've done stuff. The thing that I'm really proud about though is the Forest Paths method. It's an accumulation of many years working across a bunch of different mediums. Basically it's come from a design philosophy of making sure that the power of all stories is recognized in this process. It's plain language, it's accessible, which means it's also very practical. It's not high level at all. It will literally help you understand how to create the drama that you need to access to connect with the audience that you'd like to connect with. It is collaborative at its core, and it helps you integrate considerations that are wider than just the narrative design. So obviously your narrative design impacts the rest of the game development process, but also impacts a whole bunch of other things like streamers, marketing, accessibility, and so on. You'll see here that I'm starting with a blank spreadsheet. I think sometimes it's very good for examples to begin at the very beginning. So literally all I've done is opened up this spreadsheet and renamed it. You'll see at the top left there, it's called High Concept Formula. You have to excuse me, I'm going to look at this screen because it's bigger. This is also the benefit of doing this talk from my home office. So we've got a spreadsheet here, and for the first step in what we're trying to do, this is probably one of the best ways of starting, using a high concept formula. Again, this is about making sure you're asking yourself the right questions more than anything else, but it's really super simple. You have the player, which isn't the player as a character, performs activities. You'll see that these are variables, and you'll probably be guessing these as we go along, that manage resources to overcome obstacles, achieve the goal, whatever that might be. So these are the elements that need to go into a game. Super simple stuff. This is probably a really good place to, if you're starting ideas for the first time, you're just brainstorming, a really good way of kind of getting your ideas out just in a table with you and your team and try and work out the kind of game that you're trying to make. I am going to use an example that I've been thinking about, which is going to be a bit more of a mature game, a bit of a game for adults, and trying to get away from conflict. So that to provide a bit of a slightly different example to what you might expect for, say, a shooter or a horror game or something like that. Basically, the idea that I had was that this is about an old man who lives in the city, and as unfortunately what happens sometimes is with old people, they end up being the last people in their friendship circle to be alive. Unfortunately, they last longer than everyone else important to them, and so there's a lot of isolation that comes with that. So the idea of this game is that this old person is taking a journey back home to try and reconnect with their roots, essentially, because that's where they made all their lifelong friends, and so they want to return back there. And the general kind of gist, the impetus for this idea too was that I wanted to create a game about the friends we make along the way. So hopefully we'll get to a narrative design which achieves that before I finish this video. I also will say, like, my goal for today's example too is to just get the narrative design to a point where we could come up with a really good solid place to go forward designing a vertical slice, because it is a new idea, and the role-playing kind of aspect of this would be that we're a studio maybe, or I'm playing as a solo developer who's coming up with an idea, maybe to go for funding or maybe to pitch to the team. So vertical slice is what we're aiming for. So the character is an old man. The activities that I've been thinking of, so where we want to, I'm going to set it in Australia, so we can travel across Australia. Typing skills, ahoy. And then making friends. Which, I guess is it's about relationships, I guess. So resources, so time is a factor, maybe fuel is a factor, and maintenance of the vehicle, maintenance, maintenance of the vehicle. I don't know if that's how you spell maintenance. Anyway, the obstacles, distance, loneliness. I feel like in resources, we're going to put in relationships here, I think, because, we're managing them. It's something that we're managing and hopefully we'll get something out of it. And the goal is to return to where he grew up. Cool. So that's a pitch for a game, right? So the player is an old man who's traveling across Australia, maybe making friends, as a way of managing time and fuel and the maintenance of their car, through these relationships, overcoming distance and loneliness along the way, hopefully, to return to where he grew up. That's I'm very comfortable with that as a pitch. This would be something that I'd automatically be able to take to the team to start kind of getting their ideas about whether all of these aspects or elements we want in the game kind of as they are, and start those conversations about mechanics in particular. This feels a little bit kind of walking simulator so far, and that's probably where I'm going to take it from this point forward. So I have just jumped forward a little bit to save you watching me doing some of the tedious stuff. Basically what I've done is created a matrix here and set up what we need to go forward. But what we're going to do next though is, this is exactly what we just did, our high concept formula. I've stuck the word can in front of it, I put the question at the end of it, and that now makes it a dramatic question. So can the old man travel across Australia making friends, managing time, fuel, maintenance and relationships to overcome distance and loneliness, to return to where he grew up? Those of you who are familiar with the dramatic question, there's no surprises there. Those of you who aren't familiar, just have a quick Google. It's not very deep to understand, although the use of it can be super deep. But the next thing we want to do is have a look at this matrix. Now, it's simply put, from left to right is time progressing through the game, through the gameplay experience. And then each of these are sequences. And each of these sequences are broken up into, I've got 5 different elements. These elements that I've got here are from the variables that we've got from the high concept formula. But these elements should change depending on what genre you're doing, what type of game you're playing, what questions you're trying to answer for yourself. And so, they might even change over the process of doing this. But the first thing we will do is across the top here we have, so this is the dramatic question. This is where we want the answers to that dramatic question. So what I want to do though is, this is feeling like a bit of a walking simulator. So, the answers to these questions are either yes or no. Because of the genre of walking simulators, generally, a yes is the player feels like that they can move forward through the experience without any kind of really hard pushback. Obviously, a no is the opposite of that. A no is when the player feels like they can't move forward without a definitive gate being opened or an obstacle being overcome. But for us, it's a walking simulator. We don't want really any kind of to feel like there's any impediment here. These resources shouldn't ever completely deplete. They should only be concerns. These obstacles should never be absolute at any point for most of the experience. I want to mix things up a little bit though. and we're going to have a no here. And the reason why I want to know is because he wants to return to where he grew up. This is a very tangible goal, but I kind of want to say no to achieving that tangible goal so that we can explore what intangible goals that he might achieve along the way. So, this is a case of, usually in cinema terms, they call it, not getting what you want, but getting what you need. In this case, he wants to return to where he grew up, but I want to explore what he needs. This is a game that I want to be about the friends we make along the way. So in this case here, what he wants is to return to where he grew up, but what he needs to do is make friends. And so that's the experience that I want to put the player through. So that's going to be a no at that point there. I don't know what that looks like yet. The good thing about this is, I've got drama there and it's just an intention. I don't even know what that looks like yet, and I don't need to. Also, when you're doing this sort of stuff, it's perfectly fine to start with intention and then work your way into detail. That's perfectly fine. And that should be what your process is. The other cool thing about this is that if you want to, you can get your whole team in front of a screen straight away with this blank document and start working with it. And then maybe do some analysis along the way, or just start with intention, that sort of thing. The other thing that I think I'm going to do, because we're in walking simulator kind of territory, is I don't think that obstacles are so important as themes are, because it's about making friends and doing that. There's different themes that kind of arise from that. Also too, he's in a very interesting situation being an older person facing isolation. There's some themes there that we want to investigate. The other issue is with walking simulators, theme is at the heart of those. So we want to see that reflected in the design that we're doing as well. I think the other thing too is, because there's a very simple progression here, there's not going to be too much of a difference in goals going forward. So I don't really feel like it's something that we need to track through this process. So, I'm going to put intended audience there instead. Now, part of the reason for that is, we're making this as a game for an older audience, or for an audience rather who's really interested in engaging with a specific style of story and this kind of narrative content. So I'm going to draw a line underneath it, just to mark it as this element is not a narrative design element, it's a functional element. It's not meant to necessarily impact on anything above it, but anything above it, that line, will impact what is below it. And I think it's important to kind of keep in mind, who our intended audience is and what effect our narrative design is going to have them through this process. The other thing that I want to do straight up as well. So we do have, in the forest paths method, I do have dramatic forces. And they're broken up into two groups. One is dramatic forces over time and the other is between elements. And we'll start with over time, because usually what you want for a cohesive narrative design is some dramatic force being applied that starts at the beginning of the game and ends at the end of the game. And that dramatic force is basically a way of understanding the relationship between what the player is expecting and the drama that's being introduced by what is unexpected. And so, straight away, what I want here is there's going to be a transformation here. And so transformations are essentially when any element in your narrative design is having its context change. It's being transformed as the context around it is being changed, or the definition of it is being changed. So, typically the example that I use is, if you have a warrior who's just a warrior and they think that they're just fighting, and all of a sudden it turns out that they're a prince or a princess, the context of that character has changed. There is a transformation there from just warrior to warrior prince or warrior princess. In that kind of instance. This transformation, though, is, we want the story to go from traveling home to making friends along the way. So I guess what we want is, it's not about the end, but about the journey. So we're changing the context of the story here. There's a transformation of what this story should mean. That it's, it's not about reaching the goal. It's about the journey along the way. Yeah, and put in notes for yourself. I have a terrible memory. I designed this entire system because I have a really terrible memory. Why should I remember this sort of stuff when I can just create a system to understand these relationships that come with the diagram? And obviously, what's good about this is that other people can see this and be able to follow it with you. I'm not sure that there are any. Yeah, I would say the other dramatic force over time is a reversal, and we're not really sure what it is yet. But there's definitely a reversal here from a yes to no. Reversal of fortune. This is the traditional definition of what a reversal is, a reversal of fortune. I've expanded that definition to include all reversals where you have one element that changes from one state to its opposite. In this case, it reflects the traditional understanding of fortune going from good to bad. But there's no reason why it couldn't be from, if it's an art style, from black to white, if it's, if it's time from night till day, that sort of thing is a reversal. And then we've got, probably should start looking at any kind of low-hanging fruit that we have as well. I mean, we don't really have any kind of story there, but we can just kind of look at things and go, okay, begins the journey there. I'm not going to put ends the journey there because we want this transformation, and this is a no. So, and we still don't know what that means yet. But maybe then, what we can kind of do is actually just look at activities and help activities decide for us, what the story will be and different things. So, this is pretty simple. So there's two activities here: traveling across Australia and making friends. So why don't we just put travel with a capital, because I'm a stickler for things like that. Making friends. Travel. I'm going to leave that one blank because we don't know what we're doing there. And this one's going to be making friends. And this one's going to be making friends. Cool, great. We already have a really nice structure there as well. So, there's a rhythm there that the player will be able to identify. And I think, that's good. There's some structure there that the player will kind of understand about. Resources. So basically, I think what's going on here is, the other elements that we've got here are probably going to want to inform us before we even really want to think about what the actual story is. Although, they need to stop to make friends. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So what we might want to do then too is actually now just kind of work out what resources we'll want to use and when. I feel like, at the beginning it's going to be all good. And at the end, all bad, maybe. This is a work in progress. And then what we've got along the way, well, what we could probably do is just go, so let's just make it a fuel thing here and a maintenance thing here, and then a time thing here. Great, awesome, we've ticked off. So, this isn't to say that these resources aren't necessarily an issue like in any other point of the narrative design, but it just means in these particular sequences, this is what we're concentrating on. In sequence 2, it's going to be about the player having to stop to manage fuel, and the way they're going to do that is by making friends with someone. That seems pretty simple. What we might do, is there a theme there? Well, from the beginning we know that isolation is an issue. That's something that we want to explore from the beginning. And, the evolution of that, I guess, if they're making friends or talking to someone is, the time left alive and what to do with it, I think. I mean, the cool thing about this is we can just kind of drop in random ideas here. Shouldn't be touching my face, coronavirus. Drop ideas, like just ideas of themes that we do want to work with here, and then just fold them in at this point. So maintenance here. I mean, I feel like you know, losing health as an older person fits really nicely with maintenance being the issue there. So, and I guess fuel does too. How much fuel is left in the tank? How much time is left alive? How much maintenance? You know, maintenance versus losing health. You know, there's. So what I'm going to do is, so this is another dramatic force at play here, where you have two elements that have a relationship that cause, you know, that create drama. In this case, it's a synergy between resources and the themes. You know, fuel equals time left alive. And it's important to note these sorts of things. I mean, this one's basically just for yourself as a narrative designer, but I guess, but even in this kind of scenario, if I am the narrative designer, but it ends up being handed over to a writer, you know, the writer knows that this is the gold. We want something really special out of this relationship between resources and themes, in this case, particularly being fuel and time left alive. So yeah, and maintenance and losing health. You know, this is probably another synergy. I'm not even going to bother typing the note there. We just know that resource maintenance and losing health is a good synergy there. Yeah, okay, so I don't know about the last one yet, and that's okay. I think we can leave that there. So do we have enough for a story? Intended audience. Yeah, so what I'm looking for here is like what impact it will have on the intended audience. And I think beginning the journey, travel, all good, isolation, you know, I want there to be a sense of hope for the intended audience. So, you know, it can't be all doom and gloom. And I'm hoping that, you know, the beginning of journey, the traveling, everything is all good at the beginning, you know. So, you know, I want, even though there's isolation here as the theme, you know, they're doing some kind of decisive action. You know, so for the intended audience, that's hopefully what they'll be excited about at the beginning of the game, and what they'll kind of engage with. We probably should look at the ending, and you know, I feel like we're getting a long way ahead with some of the other stuff without having the ending kind of nailed down, and it's probably time to do so. So our clue here at the moment that we've got is that things are all bad in terms of the car, in terms of, you know, that's the resources that we're managing here, but you know, I can't help but think that if this is a no, they're not necessarily getting to return to where they grew up, that there is, you know, there's some kind of synergy here, even though I don't know what that means yet, although I've got a kind of a sense of where that might be going. The other issue is we have another dramatic force over time here, between you know, this sequence in the resources and this sequence in the resources as well. You know, there is an escalation here where maintenance is a problem. You know, I guess I'm making the decision to make this a dramatic force, right? We're in the second half of the game here. We want some kind of drama and that sense of impending drama, and that can come from an escalation. Car, you know, car suffering to car dead. These are my notes. They don't need to be the best writing in the world. I'm going to put a blue on that to let me know. So that's another dramatic force over time escalation. Now this isn't progression. Progression doesn't necessarily need to be noted on here. Any escalation is something, an increase that is beyond what the player expects in whatever element you're dealing with. So we're dealing with resources here, you know. So it looks like if we've got this escalation here leading towards the ending is that the car is all bad. So that means that stops, you know, car is dead. You know, I feel like that is yeah, all bad. Car is towed. Time is the resource here being managed because car isn't functioning. So that's where the sense of urgency is. I'm going to pull this escalation back to this one here because the car's not functioning here. So we've got this escalation. It's still car suffering to car dead, but it's just happening one sequence beforehand. So now we need to work out how we're going to get this character from wherever they've stopped here to their destination. I guess where we're going with this is that he's not going to survive this journey, unfortunately. So, old man passes away in the car. To explain this, because the car isn't functioning either, car towed to the town where he grew up. So in this case then we've got the new friend responsible, for returning old man and car to the town where he grew up. That's a really heavy ending. But a really powerful one, and I think that ends up really heightening this sense of it is not about the journey, because unfortunately he didn't survive the journey, but he did make friends along the way. So it's definitely a case of him not necessarily getting what he wanted, but he did get what he needed in that. So it does obviously pose a bit of a problem for for what the player is doing here, but it's not necessarily a problem. But the player controls new friend, perhaps. So what I might do actually is that the car is towed. The car is going to be towed to the town. Old man gets lift with new friend, but old man passes on the final leg as well. So this would be a case of the player is driving the old man back to along this final leg back to the old town, and then he passes along the way. And there's something I really like about that. It means that it's a bit of a shift for the player's perspective, because now they're playing this new friend who they've possibly never met before. But there's also something really lovely to be had there about this new friend being responsible, and so this player being responsible for the final moments of this old man that they've had this really kind of strong relationship with along the way. But we've only got a few minutes left, and we're aiming for a vertical slice. So what we probably want to do here is have something kind of worked out, at least two sequences where we have something kind of fleshed out a bit better for a vertical slice experience. What I'd probably want to do is have a travel sequence and a conversation sequence in this. So what we probably want to do is this is probably going to be our vertical experience that we're aiming for. So we just need to make sure that this is the section that we've got complete to hand over for the rest of the team. Traveling, talking to themselves while driving, responding to music they're listening to. Cool. So that's look, we'll put in nostalgia there. The nostalgia from the themes is going to be prompted by the music they're listening to. Traveling. I'm going to put in branching dialogue. So the player gets to navigate, I guess, the internal thought process of the old man, making friends through dialogue as well. There doesn't need to be any trade. There doesn't need to be any kind of inventory management. And I don't want this to be about conflict either. They have to stop stops to get something minor, actually stop to get noise investigated. So there's a bit of a foreshadowing there about the car is kind of on its last legs. Stops to get noise investigated. Making a friend, maintenance, talks to what do they call them? Talks to repairman. No, repair person. Because they're not all men. It's really bad that we had this kind of gendered language ingrained in our English. Stops to get noise investigated, talks to repair person, and now I know that this conversation is going to be mostly about the car's health, but some of it will also be they'll be referring to their own health as well, and maybe that'll be a bit of an issue. So the cool thing is I don't even need to necessarily know who this character is that they're talking to. This is enough that I could go to the rest of my team and have a starting a conversation with them about what this looks like. So intended audience, losing health, intended audience, relating to other people, a common problem. I know it's a bit of a cliche, I guess, for old people to talk about what ails them. But I want everyone in the team to know that this is what we're aiming for, that it should be actually about two people relating to each other, about this experience. So there's going to be something about the character that this old man is talking to, obviously, that they will be able to relate to the old man. And we also, so we've got this synergy here. We also know that this escalation needs to work. So if we're creating this for the vertical slice, we know that these elements here need to function to deliver on the promise of, this transformation that runs through the entire experience, as well as this escalation that needs to be paid off in the second to last sequence. It's cool. So we've got that at sequence there. We do want a traveling sequence though. Resources. Yeah, I'm not really sure there are any resources that are being managed there that we need to include here, because it is about nostalgia. To a certain degree, we don't ever want any resources here. Maybe we even just want to let the player drive for as long as they want to drive. This is a slow game. And so what could be interesting for our intended audience is a time for self-reflection. Which isn't something that older people necessarily are short of, because with the isolation comes time for them to think for themselves. But this is a bit more of a structured. It's almost a bit of could be a bit of a structured meditation. This sequence in its style, let's put that there. And for us in Australia, these long drives are part of our culture, and part of a long tradition of what it is to be Australian, because we live in such a big country with cities that are so far apart. I think this is something that a lot of people, particularly in Australia, would kind of relate to. And there is something kind of, structured meditation around these long drives. You do get in a frame of mind that you don't necessarily get in when you're traveling to work or even just sitting on your own in the house. So I feel like, if our goal is to achieve, enough of a narrative design to go ahead with developing a vertical slice, I feel like we've got that here. I'm just going to put talking to themselves in the sequence here so that we know story-wise at least where we're going here. But so the cool thing is, right, we now have what I call the beginning of a narrative design pattern. And part of the reason why I don't call it a template or I don't call it a plan is because some of this stuff has very specific detail and some of this really just has vague intention and some of it is perfectly blank. And that's because this pattern is evolving. This should be a living document that kind of evolves as the team, develop the game. It should evolve as iterations kind of happen. And hopefully what can happen is, because you have this diagram that starts to put these kind of dramatic relationships together between the different sequences, between the different elements, you'll understand the implication of any changes as development goes forward. Obviously, I haven't taken you through the entire method this time around, but so if you are interested in the method more, please take a look at the book. And it's less of a plug to buy the book. It's only not for a lot of money available on Amazon at the moment, but it will explain to you and give you more examples about how to use this method. But what you can take away from this right now, even if you don't look at the book, is ask yourself these questions when you're starting to put an idea together. Think about these different elements and start to think about how they relate together, as you're kind of deciding what variables you want in the game. And then start putting your ideas into a matrix. Ignore the dramatic forces, ignore the forest paths method if you like, but just start understanding that you should be working in these matrices. You should be breaking the game down into elements that, the design pillars of your game, and then trying to understand how these different elements relate to each other at any given moment in the game, and what the relationships, how those elements evolve over time through the play experience. So I hope that this has helped give a bit of an insight into the method, and even if you're not interested in pursuing the method, just a way of understanding how you might want to kind of organize your thoughts going forward, and trying to get from those different stages from intention into detail, or from working on your own, clarifying your own ideas into working with your team in a collaborative way. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching this video. I really appreciate your time and that you have a thirst for knowledge about narrative design. It is an evolving art, science, ongoing experiment. So any feedback would be very, very, very grateful. And I'm available on Twitter, so please reach out if you have any questions or comments about this. And I hope I do get to talk to you all in person really soon. Thank you. So I'm just going to take the opportunity to summarize some key points. The high concept formula was the kind of first big one that I started using. There's the variables there for you as well as a bit of an explanation and some examples. Take a look at those in your own time. Also, these are dramatic forces over time. This is the list. You've got the reversals, you've got escalations, you've got transformations. Obviously, storytelling is very subjective, so this is about actually establishing what's expected, and then these dramatic forces should be above what is expected. This is the changes that you should see over time in your narrative. And then we've got these dramatic forces between elements, the synergy, opposition, and absence. Didn't use all of these in the example today. Absence is, in particular, is tricky, and it comes from Japanese traditional storytelling more than anywhere else, it seems, from my research. But also there's just the list there for you to refer to again later. So thank you. That's all from me today. I really appreciate you spending the time, even virtually, to come to my talk. I am available on Twitter. Please reach out. I always love to get feedback from people. And of course, if you want to see the forest paths method in full, if you want to see more diagrams and examples, then the book is available. I really appreciate your time and your support and the opportunity that GDC is giving me and presenting to you today. Keep on making great stories.